So let me just say a few words about what we have in store for you. The theme, as you know, is the role of family business, which in emerging markets is particularly important. I read somewhere that if you look at the S&P 500, about a third of the companies on that list are family-owned companies. But if you go to the emerging markets, that proportion is going to be much higher. In India, for instance, they estimate it might be 70 to 80% of the large companies. That is, any company with revenues over $1 billion, which they define as large companies in a McKinsey study. In a country like India, you would find 70 to 80%, which is a phenomenally high number. If you go to Latin America, you might find it slightly lower. And then when you go to the Middle East, you might find it to be even slightly lower, but still in the 60% range. On the other hand, if you go to East Asia, you might find it's 80 to 90%. So the engine of growth in many of the emerging markets is disproportionately family-owned companies. And that's one reason that we want to focus on these companies. The other aspect of the family business is that they present some special challenges in how you manage them. And one of the things we want to explore in the course of this day is what are the distinctive features of family businesses, and what does it mean for you if you have to compete with them, if you have to partner with them, and if you have to work with them, what are the things you need to keep in mind if you're dealing with family businesses. So the topics that we are going to explore very quickly today, we'll start with Farhad Forbes, sort of setting the table for the whole day, talking about the challenges facing family businesses everywhere. So it's like, let's take a broad view and then zoom into India for a bit, and then at the end of the day, we'll zoom back out and look at this topic very, very broadly. Then we're going to have a session looking at the competitive advantage of family businesses, and then turn to the challenges of governing and leading family companies, including the relationship between the family and professional managers. How do you manage that? Then we're going to have a session looking at the role of the next generation of leaders and the issues of succession, and the challenges of having the transition from one generation to the next. Then we'll have a session after that looking at the role of the social responsibility of family businesses. And we can conclude, as I said, with the session on the future of family business. So that's kind of the range of topics we will be exploring today. To get us started, as I said, the first session, the theme is challenges facing family businesses everywhere. And we're absolutely delighted to have Farhad Forbes join us for this session. Let me just say a little bit about Farhad. Farhad has 3 degrees from Stanford. I don't think that maybe you could get a PhD as well, Farhad, someday. And he's an engineer by training, and their company is very much a technology engineering-oriented company. It's a privately owned company. He's the second generation manager in that enterprise. If I'm not mistaken, next year will be the 100th anniversary of the founding of this company. Am I right, Farhad? Okay, all right. Okay, so it's been around a long time, but it's still a private company. And so Farhad wears that hat as himself being someone who leads a family-owned enterprise. But he's also been very active on the Indian family business landscape. And so he knows the Indian family business scene very well. And even more interestingly, he was served 2 terms as the global chair of the Family Business Network International, which is a network that brings together about 4,000 companies that are family-owned across 65 countries. So in that capacity, he's had the chance to look at this phenomenon at a global level. So to have someone who's himself running a family business, knows the Indian scene very well, and has also played this important role at a global level, I think is just a perfect way to start exploring this topic. Now, to explore it with me, mainly to take the lead in discussing the topic, is Ashish Chugh, who's kindly going to here with us and also going to spend the day with us. Ashish is an engineer by training. Then when he got his MBA from Harvard Business School, he turned to finance, and he now manages a portfolio focused on emerging markets, public equities for Loomis Sayles. and he's also on the advisory board of our Center for Emerging Markets. So with that, let's invite Farhad and Ashish to join us on stage here, and we'll get going with the first session. Farhad, we'll have you sit in the middle.
Thank you.
So to get us started, can you hear me? Yeah. To get us started, Farhad, why don't you just share with us some of your thoughts on the topic of, what are the main challenges that family businesses are faced everywhere?
Sure. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be with you, and very nice to meet you as well, Ashish. Before I talk about the challenges, I think I'd just like to set a little context about family businesses. Ravi, sort of alluded to it in his introduction, but I think it's good to know a little bit about family-owned businesses and, about what, you hear figures about, in terms of overall contribution which they make in the global economy. But it's good to understand what that contribution is. So first, there's an economic contribution, certainly, because many businesses start as family businesses all over. Yes, you have a different model today, which is, startup oriented, which is not family business oriented. But the vast majority of businesses, and these are small businesses, which they later become larger businesses, and there are some which remain small. But if you look at the overall number of family businesses, it's a huge number all across the world. So as far as economic contribution, I mean, there's some studies which have been done by some of the consulting firms, and they talk about, say, 70% of global GDP comes from family-owned companies all across the world. And if you look at employment from family-owned companies is also in that broad percentage range, 60 to 70%. So if you really look at it, the impact that family businesses have on the world is quite significant. Now, what we read about and what we hear about is the very large firms, which are not necessarily family-owned. But this is just to say that, in terms of physical impact and contribution that family firms make, it's a very significant number, just because of the sheer number and the sheer number of people who are connected with family businesses, either as direct employees and also in terms of whether they're part of the supply chain, whether they're part of the vendor group or the customers of family businesses, and also the institutions, financial institutions, etc. So that's number one, as far as the contribution from an economic point of view. Then there's a significant social contribution as well. They provide stability to the community ecosystems, and also in terms of employment stability and community development. So if you look at Indian family firms, for example, you take the Tatas, which is not a family firm today, I would say, but it started out as a family firm. Take the Godrejes, you're going to hear Jamshed later today, and the Godrej, look at the contribution that they've made to the whole ecosystem around Vikhroli, where their company is located. If you look at in South India, the Murugappan family, the TVS family in South India, these are just some examples, but there are many, many more which are not such well-known names. Okay? In our own city of Pune, you're going to hear from Mayor Padamji from Thermax, and our company, Forbes Marshall, is also in Pune. So in terms of what we do in the ecosystem for the general community, in terms of community development. And then going outside India, You look at German Mittelstand companies, look at the medium-sized companies in Scandinavia, in Sweden, in Finland. There are a huge number. Finland has a population of, I think, 5 million people. But the number of family firms which are there, which contribute to the ecosystem, is very, very significant. And when I talk about middle-sized, I'm talking about firms in the range of 100, 150, maybe $200 million. So we're not talking about huge companies at all. Example of how family firms handled the pandemic are a classic example of how they were different to non-family firms. So most family firms, and I know I can speak about FBN members, Family Business Network members, retained all their employees. They did not let them go, despite the fact that they were, revenues were, yes, some countries got financial aid, but they used that financial aid to preserve their workforce. And in India, for example, too, most of us family firms kept all our people. Take Taj, just an example, the hotels, Taj and Oberoi hotels, which you probably know of, retained all their people. They paid all their staff. Many of the global hotel chains which were in India stopped. And I know this because, I was talking to a driver, people who pick you up from the airport and all. And I was talking to a driver, and he said, he says, we didn't get our tips because we were not, driving people, but we were paid. We were paid fully. I was driven by another driver from one of the other global chains. He lost his job. He had to pull his children out of private school. And he was breaking stones on the road, just to get income. You see, so this is the difference which you have. And I'm not saying all family firms do this, but most family firms do. So this is just something to just set some context in terms of couple of other things which I'd just like to mention, and that is, there are two myths about family-owned business. One is that they are stayed resistant to change, they underperform, and cannot compete with non-family firms. And I think this is also something which now, there's more and more research which is coming out. There was a McKinsey study which was done in 2023, which actually showed that family businesses in many ways outperform non-family firms on many indicators, particularly on financial indicators. A lot of this comes from the fact that, there's a much more long-term perspective which they have. And the other factor is also that they are less leveraged because you're generally working with your own money as such, so you're more prudent. And they know how to handle paradoxes of the tensions which are there between business and family, and managing those two. And that's something we can maybe talk about later, as well. Coming to some of the challenges, the key challenges that family businesses face are related to governance. And we'll talk more about that later as well. And governance is not just corporate governance, it's family governance. Because in a family business, you need to understand how to manage the family. You have two challenges. You have to run your business. You have all the challenges of any non-family business. So you have to have the right approach to finance, right approach to strategy, product positioning, all of that. But in addition, you have to learn how to manage the family and the relationship of the family to the business. So that's a big additional challenge. And when we talk about governance, we focus, even in family firms, on corporate governance. You have to, if you're a listed company, you have to comply with various requirements that the regulator, whether it's SEBI in India or the SEC here in the US, or whichever agency you are in the respective country. But it's not just the corporate governance that actually influences the success of the family business, because the family, as promoters of that business, if they don't have good governance within the family, you have all kinds of issues which come about as a result of who takes over, succession, the challenges with regard to working with family, and you hear about conflicts then, which arise in family-owned firms, which then over time affects the actual business as well. So that's probably one of the biggest challenge that we have in family firms, is governance and managing the family governance. Second is succession. Most family firms fail at the point of successional transition, because if you don't have the good governance in place, and I again mean family governance, then you have the challenge in terms of the succession, whether it is divided between children, or whether it is also in terms of the senior generation not letting go, and the next generation not being adequately prepared, and sometimes not given adequate space to actually lead the family business as well. And then the last challenge is the next gen. The next generation actually is really the future of the family business, because if it's done right, with the right amount of education, right amount of preparation, the next gen are really the ones who can transform the family business going forward. So it's not necessary for next generation to always be involved, and to be involved in the business in the same way that the senior generation was. So in fact, each generation will be involved differently, because the business is different, the economy is different, the complexity is different. And what's necessary is to be able to find the right way to attract the next generation. So attract the next generation either to be an owner-manager, or not necessarily an owner-manager, but perhaps an owner-governor, being on the board, for example, and having non-family actually running the business, or just as a responsible owner-shareholder, where you're not connected with the family business at all, but you still influence your family members who are in a position to influence the family business. Yeah, so those are some of the things, and this is all what comes through good family business education. And that's something which we have the privilege today of having a lot of expertise. You're going to hear from Professor John Davis. I mean, he's one of the real, I would say, experts in the field of family business management. And there are a whole other group of people now, and universities which are doing work also in the family business education space. So we have that opportunity today. Yeah. So I'll stop with that, and then take some questions from both of you. So.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Farhad. Those were very insightful and educational thoughts, comments, especially the point about the social impact, which I guess if you think about it, the families or family-owned businesses probably look at the employees as an extended family, and that most likely engenders loyalty versus other organizations which might be more transactional, like you gave the example of the pandemic. So one point you mentioned on corporate governance. So from my perspective, being an investor, mostly in public companies, but also private, one area that we focus very deeply on in our research diligence when looking at companies is corporate governance in emerging markets. I focus on emerging markets. And there tends to be I would say, opportunities, more opportunities in family-owned businesses for corporate governance to go awry. There can be related party transactions, there can be conflicts of interest, a board that might not be looking after minority shareholders, might be more of a rubber stamp board, might not be independent. So I would love to hear your thoughts, go a little bit deeper on the corporate governance aspect of family businesses, family-owned businesses, and what you have seen, not just in India, but globally, of how they're managing corporate governance, especially for outsiders who are not part of the family.
So I think you have, what you say is absolutely right, and I think we have many examples. We have examples of good corporate governance from family firms as well, but we have examples of others which are not that great, and they are not good examples. And just to understand possibly where this arises from, it's not something which I've seen any studies done on it, but it's probably something which I feel is a possible reason. See, when a family firm starts, before it lists, before it goes public, it usually starts because you'll have an entrepreneur founder. Maybe that entrepreneur founder has other family who may be investing as well, or there might be some outside investor who becomes a shareholder, a significant shareholder as well. Now, when you have a small, limited shareholding, everybody's working together. It's very clear, communication is clear, decisions are sort of collectively made, and it becomes a certain pattern of behavior in terms of running the business and in terms of making decisions which affect the shareholders. Yep. And when we talk about corporate governance with relation to minority shareholders, what often happens in family business is, as the family business evolves in time, shareholding also gets divided into the lineages, within the family. Mm-hmm. And there will be some who are minority holders and some which are majority holders. And particularly the majority holders are the ones who are operating the business. Yep. And where things break down is when the majority owners running the business start to do things without the interest of the minority shareholder, even before it is listed. Mm-hmm. You see? So with good education, you prevent that. That's one of the things we do in FBN, is that we try and make sure that our family-owned companies, they understand this, that these are the sources of conflict in the family business. If you do not address the interests of the minority shareholder. The minority shareholder is interested in getting some kind of a return. It may be a financial return by way of dividends. The majority shareholder who's operating the business may be more interested in retaining profits, not paying out a dividend. So that's straight away you see the dichotomy there. And then when the firm lists and it goes public, that same mindset often prevails. Mm-hmm. And now you don't have minority shareholders who are family, but you have minority shareholders who are the public at large. And so that same mindset sometimes prevails. And the whole organization of the board, etc., is also very often, you've got people on the board who will rubber stamp. Because when you were a family-owned company and you were not listed, you did not have a good board with outside members. And that's one of the things that we try and do as well, that have good family business education to create boards with non-family on the boards, even when you're not listed.
So what you're saying is that's a leading indicator of how they will behave after they go public.
That's my kind of.
Yeah, that's your.
No, it's a suspicion.
Okay.
You know?
So Ashish, when you look at companies, do you also look at the history of corporate governance when they were private, or is it sometimes too far back?
No, we do.
You do.
Yeah, we certainly look at how the company managements have treated minority shareholders over long time periods, over different economic cycles, different credit cycles, to really gauge, because to a large extent, the history does predict the future when it comes to dealing with management teams. So that you're right, that is sort of a leading indicator.
In fact, just on this point, I mean, I was just talking to someone day before yesterday, a family firm in India. It's a reasonably large, it's a listed company, and they're going through some family separations. And this person was telling me, saying, they're working through it. Now, his previous generation is of the view saying, well, listen, they're trying to actually buy out the shares of one of the other family members because they're not so interested in continuing within the business. And there's a big difference between the opinions of the next gen, who's actually now running the business, and the previous generation, where the previous generation's feeling is that, well, no, listen, why do we need to compensate our sister, for example? She should just leave. So that's the view. Yeah. Okay, but actually, no, the person I was talking to said that, no, it's not right. I mean, ultimately, we have to find a solution where we compensate her adequately, And so it's changing slowly, but this would be an example of how a family actually handles separation as well. So they have listed firms, but they have unlisted firms, and one impacts the other.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking earlier, and I want you to, if you could just get into that and elaborate a bit, in the context of emerging markets, one of the things you said was stuck with me was you said, families go through succession from one generation to the next. So first to second is one shift. Second to third is a very crucial shift. And you said that in the Indian context, for instance, because most of the growth has happened in the last 30 years, many of the new companies are actually have gone through first to second, but now have to go through second to third. And then you added something that I thought was very interesting. You said, if a company can successfully do 1, 2, and 3, then it's more likely to last for a long time. Would you just say a little bit more about your thinking?
Yes. So John Ward, who's a very eminent professor of family business some years ago, actually, he did a study, and it was actually done here in the US, of, I think, manufacturing firms in the state of Illinois. And the statistics is often quoted and sometimes misquoted, where what he found was that about 1/3 of family firms make it through the second generation. One generation is 30 years. Yeah? So 1/3 or so make it through 2 generations. About 13% make it through the 3rd generation. Okay? Oh. So obviously, but generation, if it's 30 years, you're talking about significant lengths of time. So even though you may say that few family firms last, but actually they're lasting a long time, because if you take 2 generations, they're lasting 60 years, and if you take 3 generations, they're lasting 90 years. And you can question how many non-family firms last that long anyway. Yeah? But the point here is this, that what he also found is that firms which actually make it through the 3rd generation are much more likely to then carry on. And this is what we found very much in our FBN network as well. in mature economies like Germany and in Europe, for example, despite the fact that they've gone through many geopolitical crises, they've been through 2 world wars. It really disrupts the family business. Japan, for example, too, same kind of thing. But because they've had many generations, okay, you have today firms in Germany, Italy, Spain, other parts of Europe, which are 4, 5, 6, 7 generations. We have firms in Japan which are 12 generations, 18 generations, and 30 generations.
Wow.
30 you know which firm the 30 generations? Kikkoman soya sauce.
Okay.
It's 30 generations. And I remember Mr. Takanashi, who was explaining to us the family tree, and he says, this is me here, 30 generations down. So they've been able to have the education to be able to transition. In India, we've only gone through, if you take most of our family businesses, the growth really took place post-economic liberalization in the Indian economy. And so in, say, 30 years, you're going through either first to second generation or second to third generation transitions. And the same is true in the Eastern Europe. For example, you take the Czech Republic, Hungary, places like that. Again, because the Iron Curtain came down in 1989, and so the businesses there are of the same kind of age as Indian family businesses. So they're also figuring it out, they're learning, and because the transition at the first to second, second to third, is the difficult ones to really handle. And we can talk more later during the course of the day on why, but once you've figured that out, then going beyond is much easier. Okay, and that's why in India we don't yet have so many long-lasting family businesses, because we are relatively less mature in handling this. Yeah. Sheesh.
Yeah, just a question on the, professional management in family businesses. Certainly, in all businesses is required, but there's sort of I would say, almost a dilemma that family businesses might face, which is: do you promote? Do you continue with the heirs, the heir apparents, the next generation, or do you bring in professional managements to run the company? And if you do, then how do you manage the expectations of the next generation,
Yes.
who might feel that they're entitled?
Right. Absolutely. Right. Excellent question. And I think in any business, you have to get the best person that you can get for the job, right? And who is that best person? As I said earlier, each generation, when it in the family, when they're associated with the family business, should probably be associated with the family business in a different capacity to what the previous generation was. Okay, so it's certainly possible for a family member, okay, a next-gen family member, to be the best qualified person for the job. Okay, and why do I say that? It's not to say, provided you have all the right qualities, the right education level, the right preparation. But if not, then who is the best person? And in such a case, then, it is much better to have a non-family professional who runs the business, and then the next gen family can be associated with the family business in a different capacity. It could be for example, because being significant shareholders, they can be on the board. So from the governance point of view, they can be involved. And you're going to hear from Mayor Padamji later today. Their family has chosen to do it more that way. Okay. But at the same time, if you have a next generation member who's firstly competent, sufficiently prepared by way of education and also through being the right person for the job, as a family member, you sometimes have many, many qualities which a non-family member does not have the privilege to have. And the main reason, the main factor there is the deep understanding of the business. And that deep understanding arises from conversations around the dining table, which you are exposed to from the time that you can comprehend. You know, from the time you're 8 or 9 years old, you're hearing about the business, you're hearing about partnerships, you're hearing about struggles, problems, you know, and how you're overcoming those problems. And that deep understanding, no non-family professional would have. So if you can leverage that in some way, and also, I think, Ashish, you referred to this too, that in family firms, even the non-family executives generally have a longer tenure. So they've been with the firm for a longer period. They have an understanding of the culture. They have an understanding of how things are done. And they also have sometimes market savviness, which you don't otherwise get because of your deep understanding. And so you work, the next gen works with such mentors, you know, and as a result, you can become the most competent person to run the business.
That's great.
We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Anybody? Yeah, Ruth? Professor Ruth Aguilera is our expert on corporate governance.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for your kind insights, and also thank you to Ravi for organizing this summit. My name is Ruth Aguilera, and I do study corporate governance and family business, but mostly in Europe, so like 6th, 7th generation. So one question that was brought up a little bit by Ashish is regarding the external members to the family. And so in Europe and in the US, we have really utilized independent directors, and family businesses are obviously very hesitant to bring this kind of expertise within the board. So I would like for you to comment on what's been your experience with independent directors in the board.
Yes, sure. Again, very good question. And you know, within our FBN network, I would say most of our non-listed firms do not have external directors on their boards, and they miss out a great deal. Really miss out a great. And I can tell you this from my own personal experience. We are not a listed company. We are completely privately held. But about 18 years ago now, in 2007, my brother and I decided, it's actually, we're a relatively small family, so it's much easier to manage things, really. We decided at that time, we are both co-chairs of the organization, we decided that we should have external directors. And we learned this from a family business conference with Professor John Ward in Hyderabad. You know, he used to come every year and do this with us. And one year it was all on, you know, boards for family firms. And that's when we decided. And so we started doing this. And of course, in 18 years, you rotate through many external directors as well. And it's a non-statutory board. So it's not for check-the-box compliance. We don't need to have external directors, but the value that those people have added to us is, I would say, so significant, in terms of market complexity, because, India has become a much more complex economy. We are becoming much more global as a company. So to understand the global situation. So from a business point of view, they've added great value, okay? They've also added great value, because my brother and I said we would want three things to happen. One is expertise, which obviously we did not have. And second, accountability. As family running the business, who are you really accountable to? When our father was very actively involved, we were accountable to him, okay? But as he withdrew and he got older, okay, we were essentially accountable to ourselves. And in a family business, often you do not get people who will question you adequately, you see? So we said we want accountability for ourselves, but also accountability for our senior management team. Because when they hear from the board, so we have all our senior management team participate in our board meetings as well, so that they are hearing from the external directors. And then the last reason is something which we've fortunately never needed to exercise. But if there was ever disagreement within the family, your trusted external board members are the ones who can help you reach consensus. So you don't choose them that this is my director, this is your director, but this is collective. And then as a result, you have respect for them. And as a result, you respect what they say. And this has been the case now in the next generation in our family as well, where the external directors have actually worked with our children as well in terms of, working with them to actually see how things are handled as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Here, the front. Just introduce yourself very quickly, who you are.
My name is Pratyush Goyal. I'm from Pune. And, I'd like to ask you that this debate went on in the media also quite a bit, and I see my friends also around me that a lot of them choose to go the family office path, and they really choose to do the real estate, the investments, and do not focus much on the core business. So I wanted to ask you, does that really affect the family business, and especially if it's a listed company?
So, I mean, there are right reasons and wrong reasons, perhaps. So, I would say today, family firms have been successful. The Indian economy has been growing, and as a result, families have created a fair amount of wealth, which has come to them from the legacy business, but now, which they have, which is not reinvested, and they have the funds to be able to put into family offices, etc. So it's a very good thing, and it's very necessary to have good governance for the family office as well, but also good advice to be able to invest prudently and effectively. So that's a very good thing for that to happen. But sometimes it's the easy way out as well. And if you find that, no, I would rather just take, and that's what's happening to many of the families are selling their businesses. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do, okay? It may be appropriate to do. But if it's the easy way out, then very often what happens is that you get a significant amount of money, okay? And then you're just running a family office. But if you can somehow keep the family involved in some way, okay? So that let's say that the next gen is interested in, particularly passionate about something. Can you use the family office funds to actually be like a venture fund for that enterprise? Because if that's successful, okay, can that then energize the legacy business? Can the legacy business help that startup to be more successful than it would otherwise be, keeping in mind all the right corporate governance factors and all. So I'm saying there's a lot of possibility to do much more than just sell the business and then just invest the funds. You should ask John Davis this question as well, because I think he's done research in this area of family firms which have sold the legacy business and how have they done subsequently. And I think I remember him saying that actually the returns which you get from running an operating business are higher for the family than if you were to just invest the funds after you sell the business.
Jay?
Thank you, Ravi, for organizing this, and I'm learning a whole lot about family businesses. I've done some programs with next generation leaders and always have found those conversations very interesting. Their motivation for why they want to either stay or not stay in the business is quite interesting. Anyway, so my question is actually something different. It's around philanthropy. And how do you compare philanthropic contributions of families in India versus the rest of the world? I mean, there is at least a perception that a lot of philanthropy in India is, the CSR route, right? Like the 2% or, whatever that's mandated. In your experience among your networks, is that the kind of benchmark, or do family businesses think differently about this? Because you don't have to do the 2%, because especially if you're not governed by those laws, if you're a privately held firm. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you think about that? And I wonder sometimes, actually, when you create norms like 2%, you then don't want to do more than 2%, right? It almost becomes like this kind of low-hanging fruit that I just want to tick the box. So I've always found norms to be good and bad, because sometimes it drives behavior, sometimes it also drives kind of perverse incentives, right, to just meet the norms. So I just wonder about philanthropy of family businesses in India.
So firstly, the 2% applies to all firms. Okay. It's not just listed firms, it's also private firms as well. But this is a relatively new regulation which came in. I think it's about maybe 10 years old or so, maybe a little more. But you see, family firms, this is actually how much money you contribute. But a lot of family firms the philanthropy which they were involved with was working in the communities in which they were. So it was not just money which they've spent, but they set up educational institutions. They set up hospitals. And this was for the community. If you look at Godrej, for example, what they did in the area around Vikhroli, okay, is very significant. Look at Jamshedpur. The whole city came up because of Tata Steel, okay? And the way the business contributed to that community was immense. But it was both ways, because not only do you actually contribute to the development of the community, but when you develop the community, you have people who are then much more skilled, much more trained, okay, and they contribute to the growth of the business then going forward, okay. The goodwill which you earn, from when you're in crisis, for example, when there is a crisis in the area, the community actually rallies around and comes together, to actually support the firm, okay? So these are the other benefits which are there. Unfortunately, what's happened with the 2% is it's become a check-the-box thing. And because, and I would say this is true for even non-family firms, that many non-family firms, you take your 3-year average of your last year's profits, 2% of that is supposed to go to be spent on CSR. And then they come, because they haven't been involved with the community, they come around looking for where to put this money, okay? And a lot of that is unfortunately not adequately directed to the right causes. it's a very unfortunate thing, but that's what's happening. Whereas if you are involved with your community, you know how it's being spent, you know how it's impacting people.
I know our clock is running against us. We have just a few minutes before we have to switch to our next speaker. Is there any concluding comment you'd like to make? We're going to have Farhad come back and speak to us at different points during the day. So that's a wonderful resource. But if I just ask you to give the Indian family business a grade from A to F for how well they are positioned. I know this is the kind of simplistic question you probably don't like, but because you see so many different countries. Where is India on that spectrum among these developing countries?
So I think in terms of the desire and aspiration to grow, to be successful, I think I see India very high, including in family firms and the next generation of our family firms. I mean, our next gens are coming to great institutions like this, being educated. They're going back and then wanting to actually do something. You have examples of people in the room here. And that's, I would say, a greater positive thing that we have compared to many of the other countries that we're in, where the next gens are much more kind of still finding their way to be involved with the family business. Okay? I think, on the other hand, the maturity of family businesses, particularly of the senior gen, is still to evolve adequately in India. It's changing. And I think as more and more of our next gens become senior gens in their firms, current generations, I think you will see significant change even on that. So it's both ways, pluses and minuses. Yeah. So
thank you, Farhad. Thank you so much for getting us started on this very interesting topic. Let's give Farhad and Ashish a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Ashish, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 2-minute break as we queue up our next speaker who's joining us remotely. So again, Farhad, thank you. Ashish.